Good morning. Oh, we can do better than that. I mean, these are human assembly organizations. Come on now. Where's respect for senior citizens? Huh? Good morning. Okay, at least I have a few live ones out there. I want to give particular heed to Bob and Ronnie for sitting out front in line of sight. At my age, that's highly appreciated. Today we have, as Ryan alluded, a full schedule, and I think we also have an important embodiment of audience here. So what we're going to try to do over the course of the day is facilitate discussion. We're here to learn, to share knowledge, and to network. So at any point in time during the breaks, if there's somebody that you have not met, would like to meet, see me or one of my colleagues, we'll make sure that you embrace and you take it from there. I want to start off by introducing somebody that I just met this morning, but came to the conference with the highest degree of respect for. As you see in the program, she's got a phenomenal title. Mandy Savitz-Romer is a senior lecturer and faculty director of the Prevention Science and Practice program at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. But that's not how I came to meet Mandy. I came because a good friend told me this was the author of a book I needed to read. So needless to say, I go to the internet, I look at the reviews, and I'm staggered. These are very impressive reviews. And then I come across a review that not only stopped me, but forced me to run out and digitally acquire her book, which I proceeded to cut, paste, and chop up over the next couple of days. I have to relate this to you, that if you are truly interested in college access, if you're truly interested in adolescent development for life, this is a book you have to read. It offers a pathway, a design that is really, I think, essential and important. I want to read to you the review that captured my attention. It's written by a colleague of many of us, Irv in particular, Karen Pittman. Karen wrote, "Ready, Willing, and Able is a must-read for everyone, and I mean everyone, who believes that there is more to helping young people become ready for college, work, and life than improving reading competency and mastering the FAFSA application. This book helps explain and address the missing piece, supporting adolescent development. I can't remember the last time I read a professional book that taught and inspired as masterfully as this one does. I read it cover to cover and made notes in the margin. Thanks to the authors, help for young people is on the way." I can only echo those comments and am so pleased to introduce to you Mandy.
Thank you very much, Ed. I don't know that I've gotten such an introduction like that other than from my mom. That's how she talks about me, too, only with a little less background knowledge and information. So thank you so much to Ed, to Ryan, to Irv, to all of you who invited me here today, and to my good friend and colleague, Ann Coles, who connected me to the organizations that you all represent. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to talk a little bit today about how I've come to this work of thinking of college readiness as related to, part of, and connected to youth development, really, and adolescent development. To do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I landed here. I began my career in college access as a 9th grade guidance counselor at a large district high school in Boston. Usually when I start talking about guidance counselors, people's faces kind of begin to turn. Usually we have a story or two about a terrible guidance counselor, or some sort of recollection of some story you've heard about guidance counselors just not cutting it. Well, I was not that person. I was someone who wanted to be a guidance counselor pretty much from the 9th grade on. I began my work as a 9th grade counselor. The headmaster of the high school at the time said, "Mandy, I want you to provide early college awareness to my 9th graders so that all of the students in this school, a large, traditional, low-income school in Boston, can see themselves as college goers." Now, this was in 1995, and we didn't have so much in place around early college awareness, and I wasn't quite sure what it was I was supposed to do, but I assumed I'd figure it out. One of the things that I would do is I would bring about 30 ninth graders at a time, a class, into our newly created College and Career Center, a beautiful center with pennants, banners, books, information, everything you could want to know about getting into college, financial and academic. I'd bring them down and I would start by saying, how many of you want to go to college? And as you might expect, about 90 hands, pardon me, not 90, 30 hands would go in the air. 90 would be confusing. 30 hands would fly up into the air, and I would think to myself, either I've done a terrific job in this new role, or this was going to be an easy job. In fact, neither of which were true. It didn't take me long before I began to realize that among the students whose hands were quick to go in the air, some of those students didn't necessarily come to school every day. Some of them didn't carry backpacks or do their homework. Some of them I couldn't get to sign up for the enrichment programs that we had between our school and the local universities, or any of the community-based programs. I ran one in particular called Saturday Explorations. We'd bring ninth graders to Boston University for 9 Saturdays each semester and engage them in thinking about college. Surely this was the ticket. This was what it would take to improve early college awareness and make sure students came to see themselves as college goers. But as I began to see over time, that wasn't enough. And by the time that that class of ninth graders graduated, we had what went from 350 ninth graders to about 190 seniors, about 40 of whom went on to college. And if you know the statistics, you know that not 40% graduated. So I came to this work and have been working in College and Career Center, College and Career Readiness for a long time. I consider myself a border crosser. I went from K-12 to higher ed, to schools, to communities. Now I work in higher education. I define myself in this border crosser way between research and practice because I believe, in fact, that going into new areas and connecting disassociated information, experiences, and practices can only strengthen that which we do. That by bringing people together and thinking outside of what we know, we can do something different. And that's what led me to my thinking about youth development, adolescent development, and where that played a role in college readiness. So let me start by saying that I'm here to talk about college readiness today. I begin with my friend John Belushi, not to be confused with Jack Black, like some of my students ask. John Belushi, Animal House. And as Bluto wears his sweatshirt with the word college emblazoned on the front, I'm reminded that when I start talking about college access and success or readiness, inevitably people want to know, well, do you believe that college is for all? Do you adopt multiple pathways? What do you mean by college? So let me start and get some of those things out of the way. There are some people who question whether college should be for all or whether or not we should have multiple pathways for young people. I say, I don't know that I know the outcome, but I know that young people need the capacities and the developmental skills to make choices for themselves. I don't think that we can determine what and where people should go, but make sure they have the information and wherewithal to make informed and good decisions, and that they have the agency to choose what's right for them. The related question is, by college, what do you mean? Certainly, I'm not thinking about this particular college. Today, higher education is more diverse than ever, with 4-year schools, 2-year schools, public schools, private schools, proprietary institutions, community colleges, historically black colleges and universities. In fact, college isn't even so much of a place anymore with all of the virtual institutions that exist. Higher education is very diverse, and when we talk about college, to think that we're all talking about the same thing does a disservice to students who are trying to figure out if they belong. How do they figure out if they belong if we're thinking about one thing? It's a very, very diversified path. And the third thing that I think differs today when we talk about college than how it existed at the time when Bluto wore his sweatshirt is that what was once relegated to mostly the high school guidance counselor is a process today that's shared across many people. Schools are responsible, teachers are responsible, community-based programs, the work you do in youth development programs. There are so many people who share responsibility for making sure young people have the skills and knowledge to go on to college and succeed once there. This is a broader field, and that's a very good thing. Moving it to creating college-going cultures in schools and communities and in the home means that we're better able to make sure we're receiving and targeting services to all students. So with these changes, we have quite a bit of research, and since this is a research summit, I thought I would share about 2 slides worth. And that is, what do we know that matters in terms of college readiness? We know that first and foremost, young people need the academic skills. They need access to a rigorous curriculum, and they need knowledge in specific core areas and skill areas. first and foremost. Second, we know that young people need to have the aspirations and the belief that they can go to college. In fact, research suggests that 8th graders who state they want to go to college are more likely to enroll than 8th graders who don't. Aspirations matter, starting with a goal, a dream. We know that students need support for planning. That includes all the instrumental supports of filling out applications, connecting students to enrichment programs, as well as making sure they have the information so they're acting on correct information and not myths or assumptions about higher education. And certainly today, in today's context of higher education, students need financial support, both in the form of aid but also in the form of literacy. Early awareness about the affordability of higher education is critical. So we know that there are a great number of things that young people need in order to see themselves and to aspire and then enroll in college. And as a result, we have, in fact, a landscape with a number of things in place. We've seen a shift in our academic policies, everything from the Common Core standards to individual state and district policies where students are taking courses in certain things like math in the 8th grade, so students can progress in their math skills further. We've seen many improvements to K-16, the building of college-going cultures. We've seen partnerships between schools and universities and schools and community-based programs. Perhaps the biggest change over the last 10 years has been the explosion of community-based providers engaging in college readiness work. And finally, a number of financial aid policies, whether it's the shifting of the FAFSA so that it is actually a form that someone can fill out, asking institutions to standardize their award letters. There are policies in place, like the Pell Grant, to make sure that higher education remains affordable. And even with all of this in place, there are many students who move through these programs and these activities and benefit from these policies seamlessly. And yet there are students who do not. We can take about 10 students from the population in which I have directed most of my work, and that is students who are from low-income communities, students who are the first in their family to go to college, or students who are from underrepresented minority groups in higher ed. And we can estimate that about out of 10, at least 3 of them will not graduate from high school. About 5 will fail to enroll in college, and only 3 will graduate from college. Out of 10 from the population in which are low income and first in their family. I know the students. I know the 3 students on the far right. Those are the students I worked with who lived and breathed college. They signed up for everything. They came to my office all the time. Their families supported education, they had questions, they saw themselves as a college goer, and there was not much getting in their way. And they benefited from many of the supports I referenced, and in fact, probably many of the programs in this room. I'm interested in the first 3 who didn't even complete high school, the ones who didn't even show up, who didn't even see themselves as willing to engage in programming, who didn't even seek out the support or the available resources that we had. Where are they? I see those gaps in a number of ways. As a counselor, I felt as though many of the programming was serving a very small number of students, that some people would say we're over-servicing the same students. I'm not so sure there's such a thing as over-servicing students. I think young people can benefit from all the supports their communities can offer. But more importantly, I felt like we began to see a gap in what was being done. So when I looked back at all of the college access, programming, and support, we began to see a range of informational and instrumental supports, like this picture is intended to suggest. What became missing for me was what skills and what capacities young people needed to have in order to take advantage of these. Why was it that I could have students in the 9th grade tell me that they wanted to go to college, and yet when I presented them with an option that would help them get there, they were not interested? I could attribute that lack of interest to their not being motivated or their not caring. But we know that's not true. In calling on my original training as a counselor, I began to think, there's another body of research that can help us understand this. It can help me understand why I could fill out a FAFSA form with a student, only to have it get lost in the vortex that was known as the backpack at that time. Today they submit it online, so it's a little bit of a dated analogy. But in fact, what made it so that some students came all the time and some students never sought me out at all? And some students shrugged me off when I would chase them in the cafeteria and tell them, yes, you can go to college. What was the difference between those students? And in my book, I share a number of case stories about students like Lashai. I chased Lashai from 9th grade through 11th grade. She made it clear to me she wanted nothing to do with college. She was going to get through high school and get a job. Except at the beginning of her senior year, she came in and said, "Miss, I kind of want to go to college." I looked around because I wasn't sure who she was talking to. LaShine began a conversation. Something clicked for her. She went from having all D's and some F's to having a straight A experience her senior year. She said she wanted to be a social worker. She loved kids. She has her master's in social work today, and she runs an after-school program. LaShine had an experience with kids over the summer after her junior year. It changed everything for her. I needed to understand, how do I understand students so that I can make sure they have those experiences? Fortunately, there's a body of research that can help us understand this. All the time, doctors rely on behavioral health research to tell them not what treatments work for what illnesses, but why do patients not take their medicine even though we tell them it's good for them? Why is it that despite knowing that I should exercise and eat right, might I still, like this young man's doing, choose the donut over the apple? Actually, for me, it's a bag of chips, but you get the point. Even with information, students don't make good choices. I mean, come on, we can all think of times when we've had information and not made the best choice. I'd have students come back to me and say, "Miss, you never told me, ... You can insert anything you want. I usually would take said student over to said college and career center and show them where I was standing when I in fact told them whatever ... It's not about having access to information, it's about having the capacity to act on it, having the developmental awareness of themselves and knowing where to go with it that became missing for me. How do we understand that? How do we draw on another field to understand the why behind students' behaviors so we can begin to look at that? The good news is, and was for me, as I began to do this work and I set out to write Ready, Willing, and Able, there is a whole body of research. You all know it. You represent the field of youth development. You represent the principles of positive youth development and how we think about students on all their healthy outcomes, whether we're promoting self-awareness, good citizenship, character education, as Irv mentioned earlier. There's a whole body of research that we could apply to college and career readiness so that it's not all about the information giving, the form filling, the money giving, that there's more to this, that people could begin to think about why students might not show up for things and why students might not see them as college material. So I set out to link these two things, to begin to understand why there was an overemphasis on some things and why paying attention would bolster and move the needle on college readiness. In fact, I began to believe that these were skills and developmental capacities that would not just help kids get into college, but in fact, these were the things that would help them stay in college. And that moving beyond a college-going framework to a college-staying framework meant equipping students with the skills they needed to overcome obstacles that they might face wherever they go, to make sure that they were in college for the right reasons, that they were there for them, for their own intrinsic reasons. So with this, we offer a developmental approach, something that takes what we know about college readiness, college access, college success, and lays it on top of what we know about development. And we picked 3 areas, the first being identity. Knowing the importance of aspirations, we realize it's important for not just students to envision themselves as college goers, but to believe in their ability to succeed. The belief and the envisioning. The second is being able to aim for goals that matter. That's motivation. This is straight out of the motivation literature that talks about it's not just whether kids have goals to go to college, it's why those goals exist. The third, planning, operating, self-regulating, a term that probably many of you are familiar with, self-regulation, executive functioning. What are the developmental regulatory skills that students need, that young people need to manage all of the things that are involved in aspiring to, preparing for, and succeeding in college? The fourth area that I won't talk quite as much today about is marshaling supports. And in here we talk about the importance both of family members and peers, knowing what an important role peers play in adolescents' lives. How do students, young people, learn to marshal those supports? We present this as a developmental approach because it pulls from developmental psychology, presented in a cycle because we know that skills beget skills, that it's not about coming in any one place, but knowing that students build on each of their capacities. So let me say a little bit about those 3 areas, the first being a college-going identity. This is a big emphasis in the college access world. How do we help young people develop a college-going identity? The way that we've gone about doing this, largely in school context, has been to give students informations, to raise expectations, using College Month, College Week, asking faculty, teachers to wear sweatshirts that show what college they went to. Here we see an elementary school where students actually adopted a particular institution. And if you look this up, this is a No Excuses University Elementary School. Each of the students can sing the song to the institution to which they're affiliated. I don't know how many of you know your university or your college song. I do not. So they do things that try to make them believe, yes, college is possible for you. Here's the information. Try it on. Believe it's true. This is an important thing because for young people whose parents did not go to college, making sure they know what options are available is primary. However, developing a future-oriented identity, as we know from decades of research on identity development, is a bit more complicated than that. Sometimes when I do training with college access folks, I'll say to them, how many of you have ever heard of Erik Erikson? A few people raise their hand. They remember from those psychology days. I say, how many of you remember James Marcia? A couple hands go up. They say, oh yeah, psychology, I remember them. I say, how many of you use those ideas when you're building college-going identities? Not so much. And yet we know that helping young people develop a college-going identity is more than making sure they know what's available. It's helping them integrate college-goer into the other parts of their identity, so students aren't choosing between identities. Identity development is the most salient form of development happening for adolescents. They're trying to figure out who they are, who they want to be, who they want to hang out with. You see it. You see it in what they wear, in the music they listen to, in the behaviors they engage in, the behaviors they don't engage in. They're trying on who they can be. And all the while, we're trying to build a college-going identity. How do those things fit together? How does the research on this allow us to understand how we bring into awareness students' identity for them? How do they see themselves? What parts of their identity are most salient to them? Certainly, identity feels different in different places. My identity as an educator feels different right now than when I left very, 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 very early this morning and was writing a note to my kids in the crayon because I couldn't find a pen. There I had my mom identity on. So identity changes across context, and you work with young people in different contexts. We see them in schools and in communities and in their homes. But young people sometimes are trying to figure out how these different dimensions fit together, and part of our work in building a college-going identity is doing that. Where it gets tricky, however, is that some aspects of identity we can see, and there's many aspects for which we can't see, and the same holds true for young people. Sometimes they're not even aware of parts of their self-concept that are important to them. It's invisible, or it's not valued, or they're not sure how important it is or how much it will be accepted. So thinking about identity, we know these things are true. We know that we need to help young people make sure that they're making meaning out of different parts of their identity in ways that are consistent with college going. For decades, there was research on girls and careers in science, and what did we learn? We learned that some girls would foreclose on becoming scientists because it didn't seem consistent with being a female. Well, young people foreclose on going to college all the time because it doesn't feel consistent with other parts of their identity. They're undocumented. Inconsistent. They're poor, inconsistent. Their parents didn't go, inconsistent. I'm black, inconsistent. How young people make sense of the groups to which they belong, send messages to them about whether or not they can go to college. Our work is helping them make sure they're attributing the right meaning. Does a student interpret things the same way as another student with a similar dimension of identity? I think not. Take the example of two young men, both recent immigrants to this country. Hector immigrated from Ecuador, and during the entire process and for many years before and after coming to the United States, his parents talked about the importance of coming here because their family wanted him to have a better education. They wanted him to go to college. For Hector, going to college and being an immigrant were consistent. They were part of the same. But for Ralph, who immigrated from Haiti with his family, who has heard over and over about how difficult it is for undocumented youth to have access to federal aid and go to college, for him, being an immigrant feels inconsistent with going to college. Same dimension of identity, different interpretation. Our work is in making sure students recognize what's possible for them and make sure they're not attributing meaning in ways that are inconsistent with going to college. The second part of identity development that is critical is the breaking up of envisioning and believing. Sure, we can tell people, of course you can do it. I told lots of kids, of course you can go to college. And they might have raised their hand in a college and career center and said, yes, I want to go. But do they believe it's possible? Do they believe in themselves and their ability to do that? Who knows? I wonder sometimes if I followed up my question of whether or not you wanted to go to college with, do you believe and do you expect to go? Whether or not all 30 hands would remain in the air. Students' expectations and beliefs about themselves are sometimes fully in their awareness, but it's the area of the work with aspiration formation that I think we have done the least, at least in the current college readiness world. We've not taken into account the belief systems that students bring to schools, how they make meaning of their learning experiences outside of schools. As Irv said, learning experiences happen everywhere. But do students interpret doing well in their religious youth group being engaged, being supported, and being valued with being consistent to go to college? Because when they go to school, which feels more like college, they're not doing well. How do they make sense of those belief systems? Self-concept can be thought of in a number of ways, but one particular construct that I've found useful and has been linked very much so to college going is self-efficacy. There's been research on self-efficacy related to college going that shows students who have college-going self-efficacy are more likely to enroll and succeed once there. How many of you are familiar with self-efficacy? I wasn't, as of about 3 years ago. Self-efficacy is a belief in a particular task, and your ability to accomplish a particular task, and importantly, your ability to persist in the face of an obstacle. This concept, which can be applied to college going because it's domain specific, that is, I have very low self-efficacy when it comes to directions. I get lost everywhere. You too? I get lost. I carry my iPhone around me, and if I see a detour sign, panic sets in. This is an area of contention between my husband and I. He never gets lost. But I have very low self-efficacy. I don't actually believe in my ability to work my way through if I get lost. And as a result, I don't take risks. I don't try new routes. I follow precisely what the GPS tells me. All of my actions are driven by this perception I have of myself. But let's take a different example of self-efficacy. If students believe not just that they can go to college, but that they can succeed, and that belief isn't necessarily limited to academics. It might mean socially. It might be financially. Do I believe that financially I can go, and that financially I can actually be there for 4 years? Do I believe that socially I'll fit in with college students? I might really want to go. I might have all of my mentors and adults around me telling I can go, but if I don't really believe that I can do it, I'm not going to show up on a Saturday morning to that program that Ms. Savitz is running at Boston University, particularly in December when it's cold. The choices I make, the things I do, are consistent with my belief systems. But how do we support that? How do we make sure that we're targeting and understanding their belief systems? I didn't ask my ninth graders. I thought I did a terrific job when 30 hands were in the air, and I went above my way. Self-efficacy can be developed in 4 areas. I bring these up for a couple of reasons. One, because it's an excuse to show a picture of one of my 3 daughters. People often say, we're going to build the self-efficacy of young people. And I say, what are you doing? And what they describe is not building the self-efficacy of young people. First and foremost, self-efficacy is formed through the mastery of experience. I've tried it, and I succeeded. I got lost on my way to New Hampshire, and I found my way. I guess maybe I can do it under certain conditions. Vicarious learning. I see other people doing it. I've seen other people make their way to college, and I've seen them do it, and they're succeeding. Maybe I can do it. I often say this is why sneaker sales in Boston the day after the marathon are very high. We see runners going by and we think, I can do that. We see them for about this much space and think we can do it, not 26 miles. In fact, seeing other people do things is very powerful, but not alone, with mastery of experience. Social persuasion. Other people tell me I can do it. People tell me I can do it. So I've mastered it, I've done some aspect of it, I've seen others do it, and people are telling me I can. And affect, I am in a good state of mind to assess my ability. I am not overly stressed, my mental health is not compromised. These are things that shape self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is not built because a program says we want to build it. It happens when we make sure students have opportunity, young people, to try things, succeed, see others, and are encouraged to do so. So as I think about identity development, and I go back to the picture of the elementary school children, making sure young people have information about college is important. It's, in fact, a first place to start. But targeting their belief systems, making sure that they become aware of the areas in which they have self-efficacy, and they're given places to develop it, and other parts of their self-concept will take them to the next step. The second area I mentioned is motivation. This is something that I have said. She's just not that motivated. That's what I said about Lashai. Lashai wasn't motivated. Have any of you ever heard someone say this about a colleague or a student? She's just not motivated, he's not motivated. This is something I hear often. In fact, when I go out and talk with college access programs, I ask them what their mission is. They say, our mission is to motivate kids to go to college. I think that's terrific. Do you hang up a picture of someone saying, you can do it? How do you motivate people to go to college? There are 2 misconceptions about motivation, which if you are someone who studies this, I will defer to you. I am not an expert in motivation science, but here are a few things I know. 1, motivation is not a binary quality. It's not that either you have it or you don't. We're all motivated. We all have motivational dispositions. Adolescents are motivated. They're not always motivated to do the things that we want them to do. Lashai was plenty motivated. She just wasn't motivated to do the things that I wanted her to do. We all are motivated. And if we're motivated by the right things, we do the right actions. We have behaviors that follow suit. The second misconception is that you can impart motivation onto someone else. We can give it to someone. I can give motivation to the young people in my program. Here you go. Here's the motivation to go to college. I did it, so can you. Here you go. We can't impart it, but we can set the conditions in place for young people to develop the motivational dispositions they need. Here's how people who study motivation define it. They say that motivation is about the beliefs and the goals. The beliefs and the goals that drive actions. They drive actions and behaviors that are conducive to success. So if we stick with this and we say, well, if you want to motivate young people to go to college, what are you doing with their beliefs and their goals? Because that's where motivational support happens. What might that look like? What can we learn from the literature? Has anyone ever seen a chart like this? Have any of you ever used a chart like this to motivate someone to go to college? I have. I use this chart often. Why? Because I thought it would elicit interest in going to college if students could see how much more money they'd make. In fact, this is very real information, and I don't discourage people from using things like this. In fact, higher education is a pathway to economic security, and young people should know that going to college has the potential to give them that economic security. That, in fact, they will make more money if they get a bachelor's degree than an associate's degree. This is useful information, but it's also a problematic chart. First of all, it's problematic when you work with young children, middle schoolers, because we're asking them to do things for a reward that's going to come a long way away, right? No, don't hang out with your friends this summer. I want you to do this great Outward Bound program for the summer. I know it's not going to feel good now, but 9 years. Look how much money you're going to make, right? These are long way away outcomes. They feel too far away. They sometimes are intangible. What does this money mean? We do this and we have to follow it up with an activity that shows people how much money rent is, how much money food is, because otherwise it seems like a lot of money. It's problematic because when working with low-income communities, I think it is condescending at best to focus on the monetary rewards of going to college. But the real reason why showing charts like this, given what we know at motivation, is that this is an extrinsic reward. And in fact, researchers of motivation say there are two different kinds of motivational processes, intrinsic and extrinsic. Most of you probably know these. I won't read the slide. You know the difference, the things you do because they're satisfying versus the things you do because of what you get from them, money, social prestige, support, recognition. Well, researchers tell us that when people rely solely on extrinsic rewards, they're less likely to engage thoughtfully, they're less creative, they're less likely to persist in the face of obstacles. Telling kids to go to college because of money is setting them up. It's setting them up to step off the path when the going gets tough. But let's be real. We all use extrinsic rewards. I have 4-year-old twins, and I had to potty train them. There were some extrinsic rewards in my house in the form of a mini marshmallow. And sure enough, every time they did what they were supposed to do, they got a mini marshmallow, which meant they did what they were supposed to do a lot, even when they didn't need to. So in fact, their behaviors were in the spirit of getting the marshmallow. But because they have me for a mom, I can't stop at the marshmallow. I want to build the intrinsic reward, so they had to give me a proud hug after the marshmallow. Don't you feel proud? Well, we know that young people need help building the intrinsic reasons for going to college. We can't rely solely on the extrinsic reasons. But even sometimes, things like physics or filling out a form don't feel that satisfying. It's hard to say to students, don't you take inherent enjoyment from filling out the FAFSA? No, for me it was physics. I didn't take that much pleasure from physics, but I knew I had to do it. Why? Because it was in service to a larger goal. And that's why Deci and Ryan and others who study motivation tell us that there's another kind called internalized regulation. This is the thing that doesn't necessarily feel inherently good, but we know it's necessary for a longer-term goal. This is the thing that gets me out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning to exercise, even though it's painful, because I know that I'll feel good later. So we have different ways of thinking about goals. We need a motivational balancing act. We need to help young people identify reasons for going to college that extend beyond the money, the things that are about them, that make them feel good. I take a lesson here from a book called Hope in the Unseen. I would say to you, if this is not a book you've read, to get your hands on this book quickly. It's a book about a young boy named Cedric Jennings who went to Ballou High School here in Washington, D.C., a very low-performing school in D.C. He spent a summer at a summer program at MIT and eventually enrolled at Brown University, being the first in his family to go to college. And the book chronicles his experience, written by Ron Susskind, a Post reporter. He writes about Cedric's experience going off to college and the struggles he has there academically, financially, and socially. It's a terrific book. During the experience of going to college, Cedric majors in finance, he majors in economics, he majors in a number of things. Today, Cedric is a social worker with the Department of Children and Family Services. And he talks a lot about, for him originally, going to college was a way out. He thought of college as a way out of the ghetto. But in fact, for him, in the end, it was a way back in. It was a way to go back into his community, to give back, to improve his community. I use this example as a way of thinking about how we build intrinsic rewards. Some young people will want to go to college to please their parents, to satisfy their parents' educational dreams. Going for others is okay, but not in alone. We have to help students find what's important to them. And for some, it may be about giving back to their community. The other piece of motivation was beliefs. I said it was goals and beliefs, not just telling them they should. So the goals we talked about, not just if they have goals, but the kinds of goals. The second thing is belief systems. And one example of belief systems I'm certain you've heard of is Carol Dweck and her colleagues' work with growth and fixed mindsets. This idea that some people have a fixed mindset about intelligence. They believe that either you're born smart or not. Carol Dweck and her colleagues have done studies and interventions that have told us that people can be trained to believe that intelligence is not fixed, that it is a growth mindset, and that if you teach people that, they're willing to engage differently, right? If someone believes that no matter how hard I practice, I'll never be a runner, I'll never be fast, they're less likely to engage in the activities, the practices, and the other things they need to do to get there. What's interesting about this research and the intervention she's done is it doesn't really matter whether or not this is true, but it's just the perception of its truth that matters, that when students believe this. I find this particularly compelling because I think often of how we talk to students about their intelligence and how adjusting for a growth mindset is a pretty simple thing to do. It doesn't cost any money. You do not need a big grant to change mindset. You need to think about yourself and how you feel about this, and then take a look at your language. Do you tell students how smart they are, then they tell you they do well in something? Or do you tell them, and do you identify how hard they worked? Do you praise for effort? These are the things that change mindsets. If you want to motivate young people to go to college, target their belief systems and what's possible, and make sure they're setting the right kinds of goals. The third area I mentioned is self-regulation, and this is a quote I hear almost everywhere I go when I talk to people who work with students. After spending lots of time talking about the importance of bringing in her paperwork for the summer program, she never did. It seemed that no matter what I did, she never followed up. If you have ever run a program with an adolescent, you know this quote. You know there are some students who just lack some of the organizational planning skills to stay on top of things. Now, like motivation, self-regulation, and the skills that are associated with it, people call this a number of different things. Thanks to Paul Tough, Angela Duckworth, and others, we're talking quite a lot about what some people call non-cognitive skills. I do not like to call them non-cognitive skills because they are, in fact, very cognitive. But I also believe that to get their place in our work, we can't call them soft skills. Self-regulatory skills, like motivation, are not binary. It's not that either you have them or you don't. Some of us are better at some than others. Some of my students come to see me with little academic planners where they have color-coded every single assignment. Now, I like to plan, but I don't do that. Some students can do a lot of things like delay gratification. Some of us are very good at delaying gratification. There are some treats in the back. For me, that has required some delaying of gratification until after I do this talk. Some people, not so much. So self-regulatory skills, as identified by the research, is truly the ability to manage thoughts, behaviors, and emotions in the service of attaining a goal. So young people need to see themselves as college material. They need to believe it's possible. They need to go for the right reasons. They need the belief systems, and they need the skills to act on those goals. And there are a whole set of skills that people reference when they talk about self-regulatory skills. And I find them particularly relevant to college going for a number of reasons. I always wondered why some students could leave with a form never to be turned in. I always wondered why some students could get angry about something and keep it together and not others. And when we think about self-regulation, we're reminded of the brain and the research we know on brain science. I particularly like this picture because self-regulation is like the ability to have somebody at the front of your brain in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that's associated with self-regulatory skills, in control. Being in control of what you do all the time. These skills are important, and it's important to note that previously I think we associated these kinds of skills with elementary school-age children. These were skills that elementary teachers were very good at teaching. These are skills that keep my almost 8-year-old from in the middle of a math lesson raising her hand and telling her teacher we went apple picking that weekend. She learns to regulate what she wants to tell and when. So these skills, in fact, we're learning that the brain is continuing to develop well into emerging adulthood. That means when adolescents come to us, we can't assume that they have these skills fully developed. And yet some of our program does bank on that. Some of our program assumes that we can give the same instructions to 20 students and expect them to react to it the same way. And that's just not simply the case. Some students need, and young people need, more support. Now, certainly self-regulation has been linked to academic achievement in many ways. We know that students develop these skills, and those who do are more engaged in their learning, they're more engaged in deeper learning, they have better skill development, and they succeed in school at a higher rate. But in fact, self-regulation, as some of you know, as a youth development skill, is critical to college readiness. Not simply because going to college requires a lot of deadlines, a lot of tasks, and a lot of paperwork. There's more to it than that. Let me give you 3 examples of how I believe self-regulatory skills can be used in college planning and college readiness. The first is through planning. Future orientation is central to college readiness, being able to see into the future, but so is being able to plan for the future. The first example is this concept of mental contrasting that comes from the work of Gabrielle Oettingen and others. She says that this is the process by which someone can think about the future in the context of the reality. That is, can I take where I am now and figure out what obstacles might be in my way in order to meet my future goal? So for me, going into any school in Boston, I can count on the fact that there will be a box of Dunkin' Donuts in the teacher's room. It's just a given. There's one on every corner. So if I know that's going to happen, and I know that I want to try, my goal is to not eat them, I need an if-then. I need to have an if-then for my day. Well, young people need if-thens too. They need to plan for things so that when they face obstacles or challenging situations, that they have a default response, that they have a way around it. They need that cognitive flexibility. They need to be able to react when something is presented that would take them off their path. A similar concept to that is the multiple pathways idea. Think of this. Picture me using my iPhone and looking for directions and getting 3 different routes on my GPS. There are 3 different ways to the same destination. And that's true for young people and their future goals too. We need to teach them it's not one path. When we bring panels of alums to talk to students and they all talk about their path to college, make sure they're 3 very different paths. Make sure students begin to learn that college going is not one thing and there's not one path there. That they can actually have 3 different paths so that if one doesn't work, they don't throw in the towel and say, that's it, I'm off. That they say, oh, there's a detour, I'll go to route 2. This is an easy thing to do. It also is just an easy skill to develop. Some of us have this habit well developed. We easily can react to setbacks positively, quickly, and successfully. A second example is self-reflection and metacognition. Zimmerman and others talk about this cycle of learning, where students can be taught, young people can be taught to plan for things, to think about how it's going while it's happening, and then reflect on it. My best example is what I'm doing right now. I prepared for this morning's talk. I prepared 14 pages of notes. Have any of you noticed how often I've looked down? Not so often. As I'm doing this, I'm thinking these notes are not helpful. As I'm talking, I'm thinking about whether or not people are falling asleep, whether or not my jokes are working. If, in fact, these examples resonate or the wrong group, I'm getting an A+ in the back. Thank you. That's performance control. How's it going for me? Am I doing okay? What data can I take from this experience? And afterwards, on my plane back to Boston, I will think to myself, don't bother printing out the notes. You don't look at them. Use the same jokes. The guy in the back really liked them. So self-reflection and metacognition, this is a process. Some of us do this naturally. Every time something happens, we think, what did I do to make this go well? What did I do to make this not go well? Right? This is about attribution. Do we attribute our successes and our failures to things we've done? We can teach students to do this, to have this habit. Wow, you got that grade on your exam? What do you think contributed to that? What would you do differently? What will you do the same? When that skill gets developed and we can do it over and over again, it's a great cognitive skill. It is something that helps people build on what they do well and change and recast when they don't. This is the reason that when my twins slept through the night for the first night, I had to think back to what I fed them, what I read them, what I sang them, so I could replicate it again and again. The last one is the delay of gratification. Now, there are other regulatory skills. I'm giving 3 examples here. Now, certainly I'll reference Walter Mischel's famed study of the marshmallow study. How many of you are familiar with this? Okay, only a few hands, so I'll say a few words. This concept of delaying gratification is an important one relative to working with young people planning for their future. Why? Because when you're working with middle schoolers, some of the satisfactions of going to college are not going to come for a while. And we're going to need them to engage in activities that don't offer short-term satisfaction. Walter Mischel and his colleagues many years ago wanted to understand the ability of 4- and 5-year-olds to delay gratification. He wanted to understand whether or not, if you put a single marshmallow in front of a 4- or 5-year-old, and told that 4- or 5-year-old that if you can keep from eating this for 10 minutes until I come back, I will bring you a second marshmallow, because we all know that 2 marshmallows is better than 1 marshmallow. So in fact, he did this, and as we all would expect, because marshmallows are yummy, most of the kids, when the researcher left, popped it in their mouth. But there were, in fact, a percentage of kids, about a third, who did not. These kids didn't eat the marshmallow, and as they filmed it, what we can see and what he and his colleagues learned was that the young 4- and 5-year-olds engaged in a range of coping behaviors and strategies to avoid eating the marshmallow. Now, if you use, as my late grandmother called it, the Google, you can go on the Google and you can find actual videos. Some of them are not based on the original study. They are moms who want to know if their kids can delay gratification. Some of them are replications of the study, but go watch them, because what's interesting to see is what the kids do who don't eat it. They sing, they cover their eyes, they look away, they smell it. They actually smell it. I think that's more torture. They engage in some things. What do? They figure it out, they try to resist it, and they do things to help them resist it. We need to teach young people how to resist the short-term satisfaction. Can we teach them to delay gratification and build that skill? Because they do it, and they need to benefit from it in the long run of going to college. Of course, this researcher and his colleagues years later followed up on the population of young 4- and 5-year-olds who did not eat the marshmallow, and as we would expect, those young kids graduated at higher rates, went to college, and successfully into the workforce at higher rates. This is an important skill. Certainly it's an important skill for life and for school, but it's also important with college planning, particularly at an era where young people are getting more adept at getting things quickly. This is a skill that we especially need to be mindful of and teach them how to be able to delay their gratification. We can use mapping exercises. We can use a range of exercises to show progress towards their goal, short-term rewards, how to keep their eyes on the prize so they can stay focused until their college goals and successes become a reality. So as I wrap this up, I say that I've drawn on some research in developmental psychology to say I see the intersection between what happens in youth development and college readiness as obvious. One of the best things that I pulled in doing my research from the field of youth development is the concept of doing to and for young people versus doing with. When I went out, I talked to a lot of people who were engaged in college prep work who felt like the stakes were high. If I don't do this, they won't go. If I don't mail this form for them, if I don't rewrite this essay, if I don't print this for them, it won't happen. Now, I remember that feeling. I remember mailing things for students and having the realization that this is not helping them. I remember the day that I decided I would not mail the FAFSA form, but instead I would sell stamps in my office. Because fortunately, I was only about 100 meters away from the main office where there was an outgoing mailbox. And that students could take control of this situation. They could take control and responsibility for getting this form in the mail. I didn't need to do it for them. I felt like I needed to, but I didn't. And when I talk to people and they say, but the stakes are high, I say, yes, but the stakes are high if you do it for them and they get to college and then can't do it for themselves. I think that in the field of youth development, this process of agency, this concept of doing with, is central, and the field of college readiness could learn a lot from this. I believe that integrating these two areas together, there's obvious connections. I don't need to connect the words to one another. Given what we know of college readiness and what comes out as a sampling of the positive youth development field, the connections are there. I have a colleague at Harvard named Tom Hare. He's a noted expert in special education. He talks all over the country about special education, and one of the things that he says is, special education is about differentiation. It's about targeted supports. In short, special education is good education. I feel the same way about youth development. Youth development isn't a place. It's a way of engaging with young people. And I think that if we can connect the college readiness work that goes on today in the community and schools and the work that you know that you've been doing with positive youth development, then we can reach the young people on that pipeline who don't sign up for programs, who don't see themselves as college goers, and cannot keep themselves on track to their goals. I think that a better alignment and a better integration will create a population of young people, low-income young people, people who are first in their family to go to college, to be ready to take advantage of all the other availabilities in schools in the community. They'll be willing to make the sacrifices, financial, time, and otherwise, that are necessary to go to college, and they'll be able to realize their post-secondary goals. Thank you.
Didn't I tell you she was good? You know, I think this is the predicate for the rest of the day. It's in our hands to make a difference in the lives of youths. We can do that only if we work together, and that's why I think the following panels from National Collaboration for Youth are so essential. Now that you trust me on my introductions, I want to extend that trust. There's a couple of young ladies in the room who are making today's experience happen and are here to serve you. I want you to crane your necks to the back of the room, and I'm going to ask them to stand. Sarah Sawyer. Sarah is our Vice President of Strategic Alliances. Joan Perry. Joan Perry is our Director of Strategic Alliances. Danny Gibson. Danielle is our Senior Research Analyst. And also Peggy Jansen. Peggy Jansen is our High School Liaison. As I vowed to you earlier, being that we're here to share, to learn, and to network, you need help in networking. These people are here to help you. Please call upon us. Now, as you go off to break, there's one important thought to keep in mind. Well, besides the fact you want to come back and see me on time, Mandy's only here this morning. So if you want to get in touch with Mandy, now's your time to do so during one of the morning breaks. Oh, I'm sorry. Are there any questions of Mandy? We can only take a few.
Raise your hand.
Sure.
Here, I'm coming with the microphone.
You tell me when to stop. Get a little thing and pull me off.
Good morning, Richard Rossi. Great presentation.
Thank you.
You talked about the young lady who was not doing well in high school and then had a transformative experience over the summer and then ended up in her senior year getting A's and had a lovely path from that point. What do you think about the whole concept of transformative experiences or that kind of experiential learning in terms of having becoming kind of a moment of change, an inflection point in a young person's life? Where does that fit into the whole continuum?
It's a great question. I take no credit for her transformation. I should be very clear. It wasn't until years later when I had conversations with Lashai that I really tried to understand what happened, because to be honest, at the time I didn't. I just was glad that it did. And I think that across the continuum, it was being able to build out for her what the experiences meant to her and what skills she had gained, and help connect them to her future and her experience in the school. And this is an out-of-school experience, to Irv's point earlier, that didn't even dawn on me to sort of co-construct in any way with her. It was hers, and she made all the connections. And I don't think if that didn't happen, I'm not so sure she'd be where she is today. So I think in some ways it's training educators to be much more skilled at being able to help with that skills transference, in being able to see places, their learned experiences that they can then apply in school settings. She was able to do it, and I don't think that all young people can. So in the area of self-regulatory skills, it is about that metacognition. What do I know, and where can I apply it? Where was it successful, and what can I do with it in this space? I also think that she had developed another part of her identity that wasn't visible in the school and wasn't visible even to her. And I think if I were more attuned at the time, I could have helped develop that as a coherent part of her. She probably loved kids all throughout high school. And just there were not times to identify it or build it out. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's a hard thing to tease out and to know.
One more
Any
question?
other questions?
Thank you. My name is Christina. I'm coming from Tulsa, Oklahoma, from the Community Service Council of Tulsa. And you talked about delayed gratification, and that's something that I struggle a lot with because I work with a lot of Latino students that come from low income houses, and the delayed gratification versus the struggle for survival. I feel like that is something that is in conflict a lot. Trying to encourage students who do have that belief that they want to go to college, but then struggling with the reality of surviving and helping their families. What are some advice or I guess perspective you could offer? Because I know I can say something from my position, but then also, you know, that's me saying it from my place of privilege. So if you could have any advice.
It's a terrific question also, and I think that you said that there are frameworks or ways to think about this. 3 things come to mind. One, at the end of the day, we all operate from a very simple Maslow hierarchy of needs. There are ways in which with young people we have to identify the pressing needs that they have first and foremost before we can address something larger. I think at best we can do things simultaneously and also redefine what planning for the future in the context of current struggles means. I think sometimes, you didn't say this explicitly, but what I'm inferring from part of your question is that students feel like going to college means not giving financially to families. It means going to programs on weekends or summers and not raising money. I think the redefinition of college is that there are many more ways to do this. There are more 2+2 models, there are more GED plus associate models that recognize and allow for work while in school. There are programs now that give credit for work that is income producing. So I think we don't talk about those pathways. I think we talk about a 4-year liberal arts college as that's the college pathway. We think about those people for panels. We think about those for the posters. We need to be more nuanced in making sure that students who are facing those struggles feel like they can simultaneously address what are more pressing in their family and for themselves, particularly living in poverty, as well as making sure they're continuing on a path. But if that path is presented in a way that's more nuanced, I think that's more doable. Thank you.
Like I said, find Mandy, pose questions, but I want to conclude on this. That last question was a reality check for all of us, because we have to take this back and apply it. It isn't knowledge we're putting into a vault. So make sure that you're interconnecting with peers in this room, that we're all in a position to help these kids discern their futures. Short break, we'll be back, much more to come.